All right, welcome everyone. Kelsey, good to see you. Jen, Ray. All right, we'll just wait just another minute here. We'll wait to see if anybody also join us, and then we'll do some introductions and then walk through some of the discussion questions. Kelsey, I get to see Jonathan tomorrow at a Greater Portland Inc. Small Cities Consortium update. We'll talk tolling there, so that'll be fun.
I can only imagine there will be pranks or some sort of, shenanigans.
Oh, there already has been in the email. He yeah, we'll talk later about that. Yeah. All right, we'll go around. I think we can start here. If you just want to say your name and then what brought you here today. Ray, do you want to start?
Sure. Ray Atkinson, Transportation Systems Analyst at Clackamas Community College, and I live in Oregon City. I'm just about to review the documents, so I may not be as prepared as I'd like to be, but I'm here.
Okay. And thanks for saying that. You brought up a good point. I'll throw in the chat the link to the EMAC page. And so the discussion questions here are really based on the EMAC meeting number 10 materials. So thanks for that prompt, Ray. I didn't even pay you for that. You helped me out with that. So Kelsey.
Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm policy analyst at City of Tualatin, and that is why I'm here.
Excellent. Cool.
To represent Tualatin.
Cool. Thank you, Kelsey. Jen. I think you're on mute, Jen.
I am now off mute. Zoom fatigue today.
Oh, yeah.
I am just a concerned citizen. I live in West Lynn, near the high school, so it's where a lot of the side streets will feed to when if this toll and goes in. I mean, I will never be able to leave my house. I will never be able to get off my street. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for showing up here today. Hopefully we'll talk through some of the numbers where we're hoping that isn't the case in the future. Jan Roxburgh. See if Jan's here. All right, I think we'll come back to Jan maybe. And then we'll go on our project team here. Emily.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Benoit. I'm with the project team. Today, I'm going to be taking the notes. So right now you can see my screen, or at least I'm hoping you'll be able to see my screen. If it goes blank for any reason, please let me know. And I'll try and capture your comments as best I can while we have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Scott.
Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Buckland. I'm just here supporting Garrett and Emily in the process doing some of the technical work in the background. So nice to meet you.
Thank you, Scott. And then Jamie.
Hi, it's Jamie Painter with the Stewart Collective, just here learning.
Excellent. And Jamie, you're just an introduction. You're a part of the larger urban mobility office and kind of the consultant team that works on yeah, am I getting that right? You fill in.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
So I am working on communications and strategy with the Urban Mobility Office as a whole. So that's why I'm here today.
Excellent. And then Jan, I saw you came off mute. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jen Roxburgh and I live on Hayden Island, and I have an interest because there is a lot of low income people here who are very concerned about the tolls. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for showing up. And I'll just a little preview, Jan, for not July, but August and September. We'll specifically be diving into low income impacts more acutely and looking at how that, what are supports, what are exemptions, credits, or investments that can be made to address that.
Thank you, Garrett.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll walk through some of the questions that the EMAC is also walking through. I'll report those back out when we get to the main meeting. And then if there are questions at the end, because we're going here till like 4:47, I'm just thinking of you, Jen, maybe if there are questions about West Lynn or other things like that you want to go into, we can cover here, or I can circle back with folks and meet with you after the meeting to kind of dive into things that we might not have addressed in the meeting today. So let's start with our first discussion question that's up on the screen. We walked through it in the meeting, some of those key takeaways from health and transportation research. Are there any thoughts or comments from this group on the key takeaways from that research document? Ray.
Clearly reviewed it, and one thing I'm looking for is whether Vision Zero is being reviewed in this process, because I know Clackamas County maybe a year or two ago adopted a Vision Zero plan or goal, and so I think that'd be important to include Vision Zero as part of this process.
Cool. Yeah, excellent comment, Ray. And feel free to raise your hand, raise it virtually, just kind of speak up or so. We have a pretty small group, so.
Hey, Garrett, we've got a comment in the chat box from Jen.
Okay.
She's saying a subsequent meeting with several members of the neighborhood may be worthwhile. I appreciate the offer and have not read through the documents.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have my information. It's on the PowerPoint slide, or if we can get her information, Jen, if we can get your information, if you can send us an email, we'll be able to connect up with you. Here, how about I just put my email in the chat? Cool. Any other comments or questions on the research document?
I'll just say really generally, I don't know if this is the right place to say it, but I see a lot of research, which I appreciate, and a lot of conclusions, which don't seem like incorrect. I think they seem all correct. I'm just trying to figure out, like, how does this connect with solutions?
Yep.
And that's the part I'm not seeing yet, and maybe we're just not there yet. But I feel like I'm experience a lot of disconnect between what is happening in the legislature right now, what is happening with Metro and ODOT, and I'm trying to figure out where those things are going to connect, and if they will connect. And I think that's where my primary concern is, that we're talking a lot about various issues, but I don't know how they're going to line up it seems like the process with I-205 is going really fast relatively to the regional planning. So that's
sure. Yeah, definitely. So I'd say I'll answer it kind of at a more incremental level. So the interplay between the research document and the policy and strategy options that were drafted. So there was an intention to kind of crosswalk what are some of the key takeaways from what we've seen in the research and what we've heard from our outreach to equity framework communities. And those would then form the initial policy and strategy options for EMAC to then weigh in upon. And so a path where this could work into like actual commitments is, as EMAC is developing this recommendation for the OTC, and as they're weighing in upon, as well as like our, Tualatin and other kind of partner agencies on performance measures, policy, purpose and need, the NEPA documents, you'll see that kind of information process will then eventually lead to commitments either by ODOT through the kind of NEPA planning process work, because that's where ODOT has some more decision-making power, or it'll be commitments from the Oregon Transportation Commission at that policy or strategy level, because that's really where they will provide those commitments, and then that informs the work that we're doing here on the project. So does that, from a process standpoint and kind of who makes the decisions, does that help inform a little bit more on like where this is headed?
Yes, I think it would be really helpful to have that just like very much at the forefront for people who are just walking into this, and especially for people who are not living and breathing this every day. It's really overwhelming to try to understand, quote unquote, what's going on with tolling. And I think what I have heard from sort of the experts is that the more that you pull people in earlier, the more they can understand what's happening and not feel like decisions are being made without them.
Yep. Yeah, fully agree. And I think you'll hopefully see, because we'll be coming to Tualatin and other cities and community organizations soon. And instead of like presenting on like specific technical parts that we're trying to get feedback on, we're really framing our presentations through some of those really simple questions on how much will tolls cost? Where will tolling be? When will it start? What will tolling pay for? And so that's an intent, Kelsey, like you're saying, to even if we don't have definitive answers, we at least are trying to answer the like general questions instead of like which working for government, sometimes you need specific feedback on like a technical piece, but if you just frame it as a technical piece, it doesn't resonate with folks. So hopefully we're coming soon, and we'll improve that work. Yeah. Right. Other questions or comments on the research document? Ray.
I'm just looking at number 5, it's on page 4 in the research document about air quality. And I'm trying to understand whether this research is looking at the impact of, increase, when cars are diverted onto local streets, how that impacts air quality for people walking and biking specifically. I know they've done studies in Portland on that. I don't know if that's part of the research, is to look at the traffic diversion and its impact on air quality for walking and biking.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen in the research, it's the way they get to that is by geographically, like locations along neighborhood streets or in parks or other places. They'll look at air quality regardless of mode, and so like if you're living there, if you're walking there, if you're biking, if you're exposed to the environment, you can do analysis on kind of like local air quality, what's happening there. And then there's also analysis around what I mentioned on the urban heat islands. So looking at number of vehicles traveling through, air quality. There's kind of a different like mixture there where they can measure and project out like temperature pieces as well. So both of those, where I think you'll more specifically see kind of ODOT's commitment to that and studying it, will be in that performance measures document that is included in the meeting materials today.
I guess one follow-up question I have to that is, you're mentioning about regardless of mode. And in my opinion, walking and biking have more exposure because they don't have protection of a vehicle around them. And so I don't know if it's going to be looking at, people who are more exposed to pollution compared to people headed by car, because cars usually people in a car don't get exposed as much as people who are walking and biking. And so that's one thing that I'd be concerned about.
No, I agree with you there. And what I meant by it's not broken out by mode, meaning that it's not delineated between like health impacts to people driving by and people walking by. It's meant to simulate and study people walking by, those that are the most vulnerable in that area. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I think we're going to now move to the second discussion question, which were on the policy and strategy options. Again, this is kind of where we talked about before. This is a place where EMAC is really crafting these, but they would love to hear feedback from you all or in some of our additional community engagement work. So was there anything that stood out to you that could be strengthened, or anything that was missing from the list that you would like to see added in this policy and strategy options arena? Yeah, Ray.
So jump in again. I just quickly reviewed it again or the new document. And one thing I was going to comment on is the safety aspect. It says preventing injuries and fatalities in the transportation system. I like to see that stronger because since the county has adopted a Vision Zero goal, I'd like to see that, be towards getting 0 deaths in the corridor, because that would meet with the county's Vision Zero goal.
Sure, definitely. Thank you. And I think it's one of those things where we're trying to change on this project because so much of the transportation world and traditionally has been about mitigating or limiting impact. And our posture is to really advance equity and kind of go beyond that. So I think that this could be in line in what you're talking about there. Any other thoughts or comments on the policy or strategy options? Again, this is just to recap these. This was talking about specifically dedicating toll revenue. We had it was a comment at a previous meeting was about revenue dedicated specifically to address impacts of diversion, revenue specifically to community-based organizations. We've heard comments around like of the services that should be exempted from tolls, emergency response vehicles, fire, ambulance, police, but also, medical response that's non-emergency. And so I think in Bill's example of the public funded or even private services that are providing like trips to dialysis or those kind of critical needs, that maybe there would be a carve out or some type of like rebate system for that. And so I see Jen's comment in the chat, so I'll answer that really quickly. And then Jan, I see you've raised your hand. I'll go to you. So the question is, will the toll rate fluctuate with the time of day or be a set rate? So the tolls that we're going to look at will be a set rate, but it'll be a higher rate during higher times of congestion. So in that peak hour, kind of 4 to 6 p.m. or 8 to 10 a.m. in the morning. And then it'll be a lower toll rate or it'll be no toll rate in those lower congestion hours or those off-peak transportation hours or overnight. That's still something that we're studying, but it will not be what some places have is dynamically priced, where you don't know the price and it fluctuates during the day. That's not what we'll have. You'll know the toll rate beforehand, and it'll be higher at peak times, lower or non in off-peak. Jan.
I was glad to see the neighborhood livability that's on the papers that I was looking at. I still have some concerns to do with transportation of trucks supplying the stores. On Hayden Island, we have one store, a Target, that the people here are completely dependent on unless they go across a bridge, which can be very congested at times. And I know that some of the businesses are having delays. They're having problems with the trucks coming in with essential supplies. And I know they're businesses, but I'm just wondering how they are going to be affected by tolls. And if that's going to put prices of everything up and more delays. I think that's my main concern right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And those are a lot of things we're concerned about as well. I would say so in those, like how we're addressing neighborhood affordability in the projects themselves, and you can see this in that performance measures document that came out. We list out quality of life, and that's kind of our attempt. And we list out different elements of quality of life that we're going to study to kind of understand that impact to local communities, that of diversion that might come from the highways. And so that's an area that if you're interested in kind of diving into those details to see how we're going to study that, because neighborhood livability, quality of life can mean different things to many different people. I would love to hear your feedback on that or kind of dive into that. And then similarly, we are going to look into business impacts. I think from what we see how tolling works in other places, is that the larger businesses, your kind of freight, industrial, these kind of really work well with tolls. They enjoy the consistency and the reliability that you can get with congestion management of a congestion priced roadway. And a lot of times those larger kind of distribution or heavy kind of trucking already have their schedule to run at off-peak times as well. So they don't bear the brunt of those higher toll prices in that system. Now it's a different thing for, it's a little bit less determined kind of at the smaller business impact level. And so that's one of those pieces we're gonna try to look at and identify where those specifically maybe small businesses that are in what we're calling our equity framework communities. So our communities we're looking at for equity and looking at, is tolling benefiting or a burden to those areas? And then if it's a burden, trying to reverse that with how we design the toll system or how we invest with the money in it. And Jen, I will send you the, so I've mentioned this performance measures document a couple of times. I will throw that in the chat right now. And that's a way you can definitely kind of dive into there. Were there other comments or questions on the strategy and policy options?
Yes, go ahead and speak up.
Oh, go ahead, Ray. I was just gonna say that you raised your hand. That's all.
Yeah. I was wanting clarification on the definition of the corridor for investment, because I believe that basically if it's in the corridor, then it gets funding for like transit improvements or walking and biking improvements. And so I'd like to get more, I guess, definition for it, because right now it says consider a wider area of impact to include rural areas. And in my mind, it's very not very clear. And so and for me, I like to see specifically diversion included in the definition, because in my mind, 99E, especially down to Canby, would be in my mind definition of corridor. But I don't know if that's too far outside of too far from I-205 to be considered a corridor. But that's my concerns about transit and walking and biking people down in Canby. That's my concern.
Yep. No, that's excellent. It's an excellent comment. I'm just looking at the definition that we have today, and it's one we know this is a starting place and that we need to further define this. And that's a part of that kind of loop back process that I was explaining, where we'll come back in August with some further detail.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, consider a wider area of impact. So instead of saying diversion, we were using the word impact. And I think we were trying to, because what you'll see is through some of the transportation modeling, that will kind of inform you on where those impacts are. And that's opposed to how some places define the corridor is at just like a specific geographic limit from the highway. And so this definition, the emphasis here to capture in these words was to capture not going for a specific geographic limit and using the impacts of the project to define, where the investments go.
Sounds good.
So that's the intention, but it sounds like we're, we've got some work on the words there. So that's helpful.
I have one follow-up question to this. Beyond just the funding side, for projects, is the corridor definition also being used for the data analysis side of things? So, for the corridors and intersections that are being analyzed, is that also dependent on the corridor definition, or is that a separate process?
I'd say that's a separate process. I think because a lot of how the analysis is run has to have like federal parameters around it. So there's certain things you can assume or not assume just because of how the study is set up. So there are some constrictions there, but there's, as you can see in the performance measures and how they're moving and based on community input, there's ways through community surveys or other kind of like less data technical ways that you can help tease out and discern impact as a part of it. So
I guess for me, from my way I'm thinking, it'd be helpful for me to understand which one's the corridor definition for project funding and which corridor definitions for like data analysis, because it sounds like I need to think them separately. So that's good to know.
Yeah, good. And Emily, do you mind capturing that just as a note maybe on here of the different like corridor definition between strategies and mitigation investment?
Thank
that's
you.
good. That's a good point, Ray.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions on policy and strategy, or should we dive into social resources maps? All right. Jen, I see you have a question here. What cities did you model after? If you take a look, I will send you the, I'll put this into the chat right now. So the research document you have here, we looked at, we've been following 6 different case studies, 6 different cities, and 3 of them that are similar to the regional tolling that we're going to look at, and 3 of them that are similar to the I-205, like bridge replacement tolling. And we've been following each one of those to see how they, when they set up their tolling or congestion pricing systems, address the topics we're talking about today, health and safety, but also addressed low income impacts and then transit and multimodal investments. So this document here gives you the neighborhood health and safety look at that. And then if you go back to EMAC materials page, this will give you here, I'll send this link in the chat as well. This will give you a link to the transit and active transportation or multimodal research we did on case cities.
Garrett, I did have one more question regarding the toll exemptions, discounts, credits, rebates, that section. I know that you just mentioned you're going to be talking about sort of low income issues and policy at some of the subsequent meetings, but I'm wondering if there's anything in, I mean, it seems like there's something missing here for people with low income.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, Kelsey, I think, well, let's take that as a comment. Like that we're going to come into that and dive into it more. Where I see, like, so where it's kind of interesting in my mind, I don't know yet where we're going to go, is that nationally and even internationally, the places that have had tolling for a while, a good number of them started with a bunch of exemptions, calling out different groups and categories, and have found over time that it's actually more equitable from a congestion management and an investment standpoint not to have exemptions and to have and to use that toll revenue to invest in basically transportation investments. And so I think I would be really surprised if EMAC, after we talk, and it will be in the tonight, this is June, July. So August, they'll have a workshop like we're doing here. I'll be very surprised if they don't see that as one of their recommended options. But I think what'll happen then is in August, as they're moving towards their recommendation in November, and then maybe sometime around there, there'll be a place where ODOT does an analysis to see like what advances equity the most, you know? And so is it a bunch of these exemptions across the board, or is it like taking that money and then having a pool for like, I'm just thinking of dialysis work on like demand response, carpool, van pool, like those kind of providers.
Yeah, the thing that pops into my mind is that it seems like a missing element, but it's not because I think there should be an exemption or a discount. It's more like bring up the conversation and point to where it would actually be most helpful. Like in my mind, I would think actually having transit that really works and is great is going to be much more effective than having a discount.
Yeah. So I think we could add to here, like, and you've seen this in one or two of our examples, maybe Emily adding a transit policy or strategy option for neighborhood health and safety. To your point, Kelsey, it really, and what we see from the research examples is that is one of the main ways people address neighborhood health and safety, is to have, you know, less people in individual cars and more people in, you know, transit or safer sidewalks for people not just to walk on, but actually bike and yada yada down the line.
Okay.
Cool. All right, we're going to now move on to our last discussion question. Ray, unless you had one more thing.
I had a quick question about the transit funding part. Is the decision about whether to fund transit before tolling goes into effect or after tolling goes into effect, when is that decision going to be made? It sounds like the last conversation we just had, sounds like into the point about if you want to provide transit, you need to have the funding for it, which do you have the funding before before tolling goes into effect or after tolling goes into effect? So that's the question I have.
Yeah, and I think it's a question. Well, it's going to take a couple of years, honestly, to work on that. I think what the hope is, or a possible process would be, is that we can get some direction or commitments from like the OTC as far as like a policy strategy direction, and then we can help build that. What is the financial plan to help deliver those services before tolling starts or on day one? So that's our hope, please. I'm going to go to this question, and then Jen, I'll circle back to your question here about where proposed toll locations. And then Jan, your question I honestly think will come up in this discussion around monitoring. So, we are now moving on to those social resource maps that you saw. And those are in the context of that in performance measures. So how is ODOT going to study the benefits and burdens that might come to communities with this? And so what we heard, just to quickly recap from the EMAC members that have looked at this and what we've heard from the community so far, is to look at neighborhood health centers, to look at food, to look at within schools, look at the, how income and free and reduced lunch plays a role. We talked about areas where people not just looking at kind of where they get services, but where they learn about services, affordable housing, and then within like parks and green spaces, look at specifically those parks and green spaces that might be next to neighborhoods that serve our equity communities. So with all that said, and it's a pretty dense document, but we're really trying to focus the questions here a little bit. What is ODOT missing from those social resources maps, and how can we deepen our understanding of the community and impact of tolling? And so maybe I'll start, Jan, with your question around, I would be interested in monitoring info from other tolled areas that have been looked at, increase, decrease pollution, improve safety, etc. And thank you, Emily, for adding that to the list. We can definitely go and pull that information on what's been done other places and how that's impacted communities. You'll see specifically kind of what's done at that, like, because a lot of times transportation planning is done kind of on regional impact. That's how the federal government ties a lot of the dollars that you get from transportation. If they come through the federal government, they tie it to those regional impacts. But I think we can do some kind of deeper diving into see what tolling has done in other places. From the key takeaways we saw in the document, the one piece of research showed that because tolling and congestion pricing does lessen congestion on the highways, and they do it a couple of ways. They actually, the idea that folks are now going to like get off the highway to avoid a toll and get back on is a part of the diversion that happens, but it's actually a pretty small percentage. What you actually see are people that instead of driving from 4 to 6 p.m., they change their habits and they drive 4 p.m. or earlier, or 6 p.m. or later. Or you see people shop or take more local trips off of the highway. or you see people get into van pools, carpools, do ride sharing, using the existing, but then also using toll money to pay for those improvements. And so what happens in the one case study they looked at where congestion was reduced on the highway, the air quality became so much better around the places living near the highway that birth weights in children were increased by that reduction of congestion on the highway itself. And that study also accounted for those, so like Ray was talking about before, those neighborhood impacts. And so that's accounting for like any possible or maybe no possible diversion that happened because there's now congestion pricing on the highway. So that's a long way of saying that there is some research out there, and we can add some more to that, but there's some good research in that document itself, in some of those footnotes that I was talking about that dive into it. We've got about probably 7 minutes left or so here. So are there other comments or questions on the social resources map? Yeah, Ray?
I have one for downtown Oregon City. I did not see the living room, which I consider that a resource for the LGBT community. They're located on Main Street in downtown Oregon City.
Cool, thank you so much, Ray.
You're welcome.
And that might be I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, Jen, I'm thinking of you and West Lynn. If there are things on the map because we have a map for West Lynn where we're going to look at diversion impact. And if there are things on that map that you want more information on, or if there are things are missing that you want added to that map, what Ray did there as far as like highlighting local resources is something we're hoping to do here in the next few months.
And Garrett, maybe I review these very quickly, so it's just occurring to me now, like I see that there's a very large map with the impact area, but these social resource maps don't cover that entire area. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's partly like just trying to focus our analysis on diversion areas. And so those like 5 call out areas that you see that are there are where, based on our kind of like larger modeling and some of our initial like delves into the DTA or that like middle mesoscopic type transportation modeling, that's where we're expecting to see the possibility of diversion in those areas specifically. And so those are where you're going to see a more fine-tuned drilling down into like what would be the impact of what would then eventually kind of become a mitigation commitment. Mm-hmm. And so I think for that larger area, so like because Tualatin isn't one of those like 5 areas, I think probably
that's why I'm asking. So
yeah. I think more through, well, one, you're going to pick that up. You'll get another look at in the regional mobility project as that NEPA work starts up, and then even within the I-205 project, and we can connect you with some of the modeling folks if you're interested. There's still impacts we're going to discern for Tualatin in that area, but it's going to be less tied to that like more detailed diversion mitigation. And it might be more towards some of the other goals of the project, or honestly, it's probably going to be more informative for this like policy strategy level conversation there.
Okay.
So it's weird because there's different splices of like how the data is analyzed, and so but I'm trying to line it up to show you like where the commitment's going to eventually end up, and so. Mm-hmm. Like the diversion thing is going to eventually end up probably more at the mitigation level. Not saying it probably won't be like there could be policies or strategies that address it, but that's there. Whereas that more larger impact scale, that's probably where the commitments you'll see there are more in that like policy strategy bucket, the type of work EMAC's looking at now.
So the reason it pops up into my mind, other than the obvious, Tualatin's not there and I'm representing Tualatin, so I just want to make sure we're well represented, is, you know, there's a free clinic that's on Borland Road that you probably remember.
Oh, yeah.
From your work in Tualatin, and that's right along an area that probably would be impacted by diversion. And I wouldn't want to forget about that.
Yeah, let's add that on there, because I know there's an, I'm trying to think, there's an intersection that is, so it's a transportation methodology report, and it lists like 30 intersections that we're going to look at. And so they still, there's still possibility that that's kind of where that mitigation commitment might lead as well. So we can get you, if you haven't seen that document and those different listing of intersections, maybe Mike has, but
I haven't, yeah.
okay. Yeah, that'll be helpful.
And Garrett, it looks like Ray also raised his hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
I have a question about the mitigation commitment document you're talking about. Is that for like each business or each city? Like what level like of analysis or commitment is, what does that mean, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So the mitigation really forms from those, the NEPA documents as they build through. And so that is, you'll see the study, it gets more fine tuned, and then that will end up being what mitigation is, what's connected to the project. But as we're going through that study process, if there are things that are like quote unquote left off or not included in further study, those are the items that then can be picked up and then would inform like these strategy investments that would go above and beyond what's committed to in NEPA.
Okay. Okay.
And then I think, Jen, you sent me a note around Highway 43 in West Lynn. So on page 6 of the performance measures, that is an area where page 5 and page 6, that is an area where we're going to look at diversion in this more fine-tuned piece. And that is where if there are social resources along that, we want to get those mapped out. But we'll be doing a good number of transportation analysis on those intersections to see if tolling benefits or is a burden to those areas. And our hope is that by lessening diversion on the highway, that you don't have the basically parking lot that is, you know, Highway 43 and some of these roads in the West Lynn and Oregon City area. My wife teaches up the road at Stafford Elementary, and so I know how much of a mess that can be in the evenings. So, all right, Scott, I think we're at time, but I'm not seeing the. Oh, we wouldn't. Are we going to get a countdown, or should we?
So back? we usually do. So we should. So I'll check in with Nick really quick.
Okay. So we probably have about 1 minute or less. Guess if the folks we haven't heard from as much, or if Anna or Anna, I don't if you have any comments you want to make that we can capture, that'd be great.
No comments from me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
And so, Garrett, it looks like we can end anytime.
Okay. I'm going to end us now. Thanks for taking some time out of your day and attending. And thanks, Emily and Scott, so much for your support.
Of course. Thank you. Bye, everybody.